My dear friends, welcome to Killer Short Stories. What you will find here is a series of dark, chilling, and short stories that'll give you nightmares beyond comparison of what you thought was horrifying. I add nature sounds along with ambient music to help you fall asleep, if you can manage. The audio is my voice telling you real factual stories. If you want to share your personal horror stories, I'm just a simple email away. Now grab your popcorn and your refreshments, and I hope you enjoy this audio. This is the first of two stories, The Man on the Bus. I was on my way to see some family, nothing too special, just your average Greyhound passenger en route for a trip up north. With a book in my hand and my coffee still hot in its insulated mug, I couldn't have been more comfortable, except for the odd feeling I had that I was being watched, like there was this unshakable presence on the bus that held me tightly pressed in my comfortable position. I was in the back of the bus, well, second to last seat that is. There were two guys behind me, but they were both passed out. The guy to my left was warm and cozy in his sweater and scarf. His arms were crossed over his chest, and his chin rested just above his hands. The guy behind me to my right was a middle-aged Chinese man with his head propped up against the window. His clothes looked a little rough and stained with unknown substances, probably food and sweat. His hair was untidy and his skin seemed to be riddled with the small scabs and cuts. I figured he might be homeless and had just scraped enough money together to get a good, long bus ride in. With both of them asleep and me being the only other one at the back of the bus, I knew I couldn't have been being watched. So I eventually brushed it aside and got back into my book. It was a Stephen King novel by the name of It. You guys know that one, right? Creepy clown who terrorizes little kids because he's some kind of freaky spider alien. Well, if you haven't read it yet, then spoiler alert. Sorry, I keep wanting to distract myself. This is so damn hard to write. Anyway, I love my horror books, so maybe I was creeping myself out. That's what I chalked it up to at least. So I kept reading and drinking my hot coffee, sipping just enough so as to not burn myself. I looked up every so often and glanced at the passengers. Everybody was still in their same positions every time I checked. If it had not been for the books I brought, this would have been the most boring bus trip I'd ever taken. The cool night air was fogging up the windows, and I'd occasionally have to give the window a quick wipe to see outside. The trees were running past us, dancing in the moonlight, above the curvy road upon the mountainside. It was late July. My brother's birthday would be coming up soon within the next couple days. Figured I'd surprise him with a trip up north and also stop by and see how Mom is doing. I must have zoned out and fell asleep because I woke up jerking in fright at hearing the screaming. I remember dropping my book and knocking my coffee over, where it spilled on my leg and started screaming. The screaming that awoke me was coming from the cozy sweater guy behind me. I turned to see the Chinese man standing over him with a knife, stabbing and stabbing over and over again. The other passengers must have been asleep or just thought that they were some crazy guy in the back screaming because it was I who noticed first and yelled to the driver to stop the bus and evacuate the passengers. Once everybody had heard my voice, they all panicked. The driver, in an attempt to stop the bus while looking at me, had swerved dangerously in front of a truck driver, causing them both to halt awkwardly in front of each other. It was like a stampede. People were trampling over each other to exit the bus. The driver and I were the last to get off. The truck driver had got out to check the situation. He came over to us and explained what happened. He ran over to his truck and grabbed some weapons he kept for self-defense and brought them back to us. The rest of the passengers ran clear out of sight, and one of them had dialed 911. There we were, me, the bus driver, and the truck driver, all walking up to the door of the bus. None of us really wanted to fight this crazy lunatic, so we tried to shut the door. The crazy maniac in the back seen us and slowly came up to the front. The door was slightly jammed from all the pushing, so we had a really hard time closing it, but we finally did. We caught the man's hand in the door. He waved his Rambo-style knife wildly in the air, trying to slice one of us. It worked. He had cut the backside of my arm pretty bad before we all backed away. We ran to the back of the bus in hopes to get away from him if he came out. We picked our heads out from the back after about a minute to see if he had made a move, but he didn't. The lunatic had retreated to the back of the bus, and I took my shot. I bolted to the front and closed the door while the bus driver somehow magically turned the power off from the back. Still don't know how he did it. As we approached the front door again to see what the man was doing, we got a little more than we bargained for. The psycho was now in the back, decapitating the poor victim. After he fully severed his head, he walked slowly back to the front of the bus and looked us dead in the eye. He held the large knife in one hand, and in the other, by the hair, he held the decapitated head of the victim. A few of the passengers seen from afar and began to vomit and scream. Between the ghastly look on the victim's face, the psycho's mad eyes, and the blood lost from my injury, I passed out, watching the pale moon slip from my vision. I awoke to blurry red and blue lights and people in black uniforms everywhere. The police had finally arrived, and we were sending our traumatized passengers away in multiple cars after being checked for vital stability. After a quick stitch-up, the officer got my statement and the driver's statement. We later found that the man was a crazed asylum patient who had escaped and decided to make that poor man his next victim. After I had passed out, the mental patient carved the tongue out of the head and ate it. Afterward, he put his finger to his bloodied lips and shushed the bus driver and the trucker. I think all of us were traumatized that night. I'm still in therapy years later. I just feel the strong urge to write this and finally get it off my chest. I'm not a big fan of horror anymore, and I stopped riding buses. And every now and again, I can feel a slight chill go up the scar of the cut on my arm and feel the eyes of a killer on my back. Razors in the candy. I always hated that old spinster on the corner of Red Bud Drive. When I was growing up and I didn't know any better, I used to think she was a witch or a monster or something. I didn't know about crazy cat ladies and alcoholism at the time, so for some reason in my child's brain I just assumed that she was cutting up little girls and boys to feed to her army of strays. Since everyone in my class was convinced that she was the spawn of Satan, I asked my dad why no one did anything about it. He rolled his eyes as if humoring me and said, "Nowadays, we don't burn witches, we just avoid them." I'd always pedal my bike fast at the corner, ignoring the stop sign and even the honks of oncoming traffic as I steered my Lavender Cruiser homewards. I remember the fast clickety-clack of the playing cards every afternoon as I frantically pedaled to put a safe distance behind me. 10 years down the road was enough distance for me to acknowledge she was probably just a lonely, middle-aged woman who thought drinking with cats was less sad than drinking alone. And maybe she was right. I know I would open a bottle of wine with my dog some of those lonely nights when I was back home from college. I was content to keep our uneasy truce where I would return a half-hearted wave at her silhouette in the window when passing, if she didn't try to come any closer to me. Unfortunately, that was something I couldn't do on Halloween. Even back when I was a kid, the only other thing the old lady on Red Bud was known for aside from day drinking and pissing off the local animal control was her baked treats. 4 times a year, she would participate in the local ISD bake sale, despite not having a kid. The PTA insisted. They practically begged her to provide a tart cinnamon apple pie for the silent auction. Even though she seemed to be kept alive by Jim Beam and Cat Dander, she could definitely bake a mean pastry. And so my little brother was quite insistent that we stop at her house to round out the night of trick-or-treating. I had driven in for the weekend, homesick and missing my parents. I might have even missed my snotty little brother Matt, a little bit. They were so thrilled to see me after so long that they immediately took the opportunity to turn me into unpaid babysitter so they could go to a Halloween party. Considering it fair compensation, I had a couple glasses from Mom's open bottle of Malbec to duel the tendency's misery of trick-or-treating with my little brother. It was working. The warm buzz behind my eyes softening the sharp edges of Matt's constant adolescent prattling. I would tune in every third or fourth word, nodding encouragingly with a disinterested smile. He was dressed up as a little Iron Man, his chest beam and hand lights making electronic humming noises as they illuminated the sidewalk in front of us. It had been a pretty good haul. Matt's bag was so full of candy that he kept shifting it from one plastic laser gauntlet to another when his arms got tired. We were almost done with the last block. Everyone's door knocked on, except for the corner house. At 3 in the afternoon and from a safe distance, I had managed to suppress my childhood fears. But just past 9 on Halloween, the old paranoia started to creep back into my stomach. I was trying to think of something I could bribe Matt with if he could let us skip the house, when he made a whoosh noise and ran up the driveway towards the witch's door. I was tempted to write a little bastard off as a lost cause and head home, but he turned around halfway to make sure I was coming with him. The gravel crunched under my sneakers as I walked past the station wagon she had parked there before I was even born. I turned nervously to glance towards the dusty side windows of the dead vehicle. Through the grime, a half-dozen cats watched me from the safety at the other side of the glass. I could hear their chorus of rumbling growls warning me not to try anything funny or get close. There were more peeking from behind the house, their eyes glowing from the headlights of a passing car. They paced behind the overgrown skirt of the house, dozens of them having made the foundation of her house their nest. I tried to ignore the army of strays as Matt took the stairs up the witch's porch, 2 at a time. He hopped onto the welcome mat with both feet straining for a moment to reach the doorbell. As soon as it buzzed, he struck up a pose, ready to blast the lady if she didn't comply. The door creaked open ominously, just as I caught up with Matthew. It was dark inside aside from the dull orange glow of the fireplace and flickering blue and white of an old television. Lit from behind, the witch's silhouette was a lanky and twisted thing. Her spine was tilted at severe and horrible angles, as if her back had given out under the sheer weight of all her evil. Only the fringes of her wild black hair caught the light, giving her a terrifying halo like an insect's nest, as she reached out a bony and gnarled hand out past the doorframe. She grasped hungrily towards us, her vile claw sweeping a few inches over Matt's head to take hold of a slender chain. The witch's knuckles popped audibly as she gripped the pull chain tightly and yanked it down. It made a sound like a chicken's neck snapping, and the hanging porch light groaned in full hum as the fluorescent bulb warmed up. Matt was frozen in place, just as terrified as I was. The witch let out a laugh that was a moist gurgle. It rose to a hiss deep in the back of her throat, her whole twisted frame shuddering menacingly as the light finally came to life. "Oh, hello! Aren't you precious?" She gushed over Matt, coughing into her hand to clear her throat. Her voice was less wicked, witch and more, Minnesota mother, as she threw out a friendly, "I thought all the trick-or-treaters went home for the night, don't you know?" She blended the last 3 words into a single, "Don't you know?" before straightening up. In the bright fluorescent, I could make out the multiple kittens and the glitter on her faded pink sweatshirt. She smiled a big white-toothed smile at Matt expectantly, and it took him a moment to remember his line. His little brain was obviously having trouble processing the sudden change in mood as he asked more than threatened her with a timid, "Trick-or-treat?" The vile tangle on top of her head that I had mistaken for snakes and crawling insects turned out to be simple bedhead, from where she had apparently crashed hard on the couch. Her black frizzy hair was matted wildly off to one side in the kind of cowlick you could only get from sleeping off a few too many drinks. The witch lifted her eyes towards me while my own eyes were watering from the stink of whiskey and far too much perfume. "He's adorable, She seemed to lose her train of thought as she stared at me curiously, her smile broadening ever so slightly as if she recognized me. "I have a special treat for the both of you. Just be a moment." She vanished back inside her house for a few seconds. Hardly time for the stench of her perfume to dissipate before she returned with the aluminum baking sheet and thin spatula. With a deft swoop of her hand and a sharp pop, she pried a cookie free. She set down the spatula and held out the prize to Matt. It was a gingerbread cat, the the scent of caramel and fresh vanilla cutting through the fog of her boozy stench as Matt took it from her. The treat was so fresh and soft I could see it dimple from the pressures of Matt's tiny plastic fingertips. Its fur was lovingly scored into the cookie, chocolate and caramel traced meticulously into the line work. I had to admit that if she ever got tired of being a drunken cat lady, she could probably get on a job as a high-end baker. As Matt breathed an almost silent, "Thank you," the witch turned her attention to me. "Oh, and something for Big Sis." She set down the now empty cookie pan, the surface marred by the burnt outlines where 5 kitty cookies had been baked. From the side table, she produced a small brown craft-colored rectangular box. Something rattled inside softly as she handed it to me, but I noticed tied to the hand-curled orange and black ribbons on the front were a trio of small bottles of pumpkin spice vodka. The witch didn't let go of the box, offering me a playful wink. "You're 21, right?" I smirked and lied with a wordless nod. She let go of the box and offered me a knowing smile before she warned me, "Well, a good babysitter needs something to take the edge off. Just have a couple, though. Don't open the big surprise. Unless little Iron Man here starts to get out of hand, then you should open it and thank me for the help." "I'll thank you now, thanks," I replied, feeling a little silly after all these years of self-induced trauma. "You have a happy Halloween, miss." I let it hang, because after all these years I'd never actually bothered to learn her name. She smiled her big bright smile one more time, brushing cookie crumbs off her kitten's sweatshirt as she giggled. "I always have a happy Halloween. After all, I'm the witch of Redbud." I spent the rest of the walk home feeling utterly stupid. I knew the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny weren't a real decade ago. But some small childish part of me had still believed that a sad, lonely old woman was going to eat me if I got too close to her. At least Matt wouldn't have to grow up in this town believing stupid crap like that now that he'd actually met the witch. He was merely scarfing down the gingerbread cat as we walked, the gummy caramel causing him to smack and chew loudly each bite until it softened. By the time we got home, he had a little Tony Stark mustache and goatee made of dark chocolate, and I told him to go wash it off. I prepped a cup of decaf, waiting for the Keurig to spit and hiss at the end before emptying 2 mini bottles of pumpkin vodka into the cup. My buzz was wearing off, and I knew Matt was going to be up for at least another hour from the sugar high alone. He returned from the bathroom with his helmet and gloves taken off, knowing full well he would need the full range of motion in his fingers if he was going to sort through the candy efficiently. Efficient candy sorting went like this. We dumped the bags over, separating the hard candy bullshit from good stuff like Ziplocs of cookies and fudge, fun-sized chocolates, and big spender full-size bars. For safety concern purposes, we would eat every 5th or 6th piece to make sure there were no THC or razor blades hidden in the Snickers bars. After 2 peanut butter cups, half a Toblerone and bag of chocolate cookies, a mini toffee bar, and the 3rd mini bottle of pumpkin vodka, I was done with the inspection. Matt wasn't content and gorged on what had to have been half his body weight in sugar. I sent him to bed just before 11. He was wise beyond his years and made me pinky swear not to eat any more of his candy while he slept. Knowing a pinky swear wouldn't hold up for shit in court, I helped myself to the other half of the Toblerone before passing out on the couch. I was awakened by a clammy child's hand pushing on my face. I sat upright suddenly, arms flailing like I'd just woken up after a power blackout at a frat house party. As my bleary eyes focused, I could see Matt standing by the coffee table, clutching his stomach and sniffling at me. "My stomach hurts." "No shit," I replied, before remembering that I was dealing with a child. He was still new to the idea that overindulging led to consequences. It was better he learned on chocolate instead of booze like his sister. "You ate a lot of candy. Have you taken a Pepto?" Matt shook his head slowly, opening his mouth to speak instead of words. A torrent of blood and congealed chocolate spilled past his lips and onto my face. I screamed. Leaping off the couch and trying to wipe the gore off my eyes, I felt the own gorge rise as I tasted the blood and peanut butter, instantly awake and sober. Matt continued to empty the contents of his guts onto the white sofa, and even though I was worried for Matt, my first thought was that my parents were definitely going to blame the couch on me. I carried him to the kitchen as the vomiting subsided, unfortunately without that awfulness to occupy his throat. Now Matt was screaming shrilly and flailing on the tile in the grip of a seizure. I called 911, rattling off our address while Matt tore his shirt off with a mewing shriek. The dispatcher was telling me it would be around 10 minutes as I watched my brother's stomach twist and deform. Something was inside him, desperately trying to get out. Matt's stomach was destined as if he were pregnant, the thrashing limbs of something inhuman within causing the skin to redden and bulge. He twisted and kicked, desperate for the pain to end. Knocking the sole of his tiny foot against the kitchen table, the box which had given me fell over the edge and landed with a thunk and a rattle. On the bottom of the box, written with a playful filigree, were the words, "You should open me now." In that moment, I remembered the almost playful way she'd said that if Matt started to get out of hand, I should open it. Desperate beyond any rational thought, I leapt onto the box, tearing it open. I felt my heart sink at the sight of what she had packed for me. Inside, nestled on top of purple and black tissue paper, was a bright orange handled box cutter. In the same cheerful and elegant handwriting were two words, "You are welcome." I kicked the box away, shaking my head as Matt squealed and coughed up a dark bubble of blood. He was growing pale, a blue tinge settling onto his quivering lower lip. His stomach settled as his chest rose. Matt had stopped breathing, his eyes pleading as whatever thing was inside him decided to try and escape through his esophagus. He was choking on whatever it was as it tried to burrow out of his throat. Tears streaked down his face, cutting past to the blood on his cheeks. I reached for the box cutter, the razor blade extending with a soft click as I crawled over to him on all fours. I ran my fingers across his still distended stomach, and the thing shifted at the touch. It retreated back into his stomach, and Matt took in a deep and grateful breath before squealing again. A limb of some kind pushed back against my fingers as if to reassure me that I was in the right place. I didn't want to watch, but I wasn't going to cut Matt open with my eyes closed. He struggled, his little frame surprisingly strong as I put a knee on top of his chest to hold him down with my weight. The blade was blessedly sharp, and the tissue almost leapt apart as I cut in. Blood gushed from the wound, but I paid it no mind as I widened the hole. I had a sense of deja vu as I finished the 2-foot-long cut and held open the gash. The thing inside sounded just like the witch's cats warning me away with a keening growl. It came out head first, a chocolate and tan calico cat, its fur caked in blood and streaks of actual chocolate. The thing had an appealing likeness to the gingerbread cookie version, even sporting a single mismatched dot of white fur where stray frosting and landed on the original. It leapt past me and ran out of the kitchen, leaving a trail of bloody paw prints on the white tile floor. I was too busy trying to stifle the blood with Matt's t-shirt to chase the thing. The paramedics were a couple minutes early, thankfully, but too late by far to have saved Matt if I hadn't opened him up. The police officer was kind enough to tell me during the questioning that Matt was going to be fine, and he reassured me that I would get to see my parents again once he had finished taking my statement. I was too broken at that point to even consider lying. I told him everything. I confessed everything, even stealing Mom's wine. It was only as I finished that it dawned on me that no one would believe me. I was going to be arrested or worse, committed to some loony bin where my parents would never visit, and I'd never be let out. What's gonna happen to me? We're done. I got your statement. Your parents are waiting, but I'm going to have a word with them first. What's gonna happen to me? I repeated, the straining causing my voice to break as he closed his notebook. You're going home, he replied. I was too wrapped up in my own trauma to notice that the detective was clearly going through some shit of his own. His eyes were bloodshot and dark, as if he hadn't slept all week. He sighed and rested a hand on mine. I have to go talk to the other kids. Just wait here until I finish and I'll take you to your parents. Other kids. It was when he said other kids that everything fell into place and I understood. I remembered that the witch's baking sheet had the outline of 5 cookies baked into it. And I remembered all those cats on her property glaring at people and warning them away. All of those cats. I knew that if I ever went by and watched long enough, I'd spot that chocolate in tan calico with the white spot. I never tasted that theory, and the cops never arrested her. They hadn't bothered to even question her in 20 years of Halloweens. What would they put on the report? That she was growing cats out of gingerbread in children's bellies? It was insane. No one outside of town would ever believe it. 2/3 of the townies themselves wouldn't believe it. Like my dad said all those years ago, nowadays we don't burn witches, we just avoid them. So all I can do is warn you. Stay away from the old witch at the corner of Redbud. And if you can't do that, at least check for razors in the candy.